Hello there, and welcome along to Season 2 and Episode 11 of the Gardener Ben podcast. This week here in the UK sees the arrival of the first spring bank holidays, which means many of you will be stepping out onto your patios, rubbing your eyes after the long hibernation of winter, and looking to your growing spaces for the spring and summer months ahead. You'll be dusting off your lawnmowers, your strimmers, your spades and forks, and heading out into the garden, some of you for the very first time for 2025. The garden has really started to wake up, and I've been absolutely astonished by the sheer amount of growth certainly things like roses have put on over the last 10 to 14 days. And even some plants planted bare root at the beginning of the year, just about 6 or 8 weeks ago, have already produced their first flower buds. So it looks like summer will be arriving here in the UK a little earlier than we would have expected it to. This also means that the pest and disease problems in the garden have already started. And last week I was talking to you about how you can avoid mould, mildew and black spot by making sure that you water your plants well and deeply. This week on the internet I've been talking to people about making sure that they get their water retaining sources back underneath their potted rose specimens to ensure that they have all the water they need, especially in this early stage when they're producing masses and masses of fresh and very soft growth. The arrival of spring and this kind of soft and lush growth also means that the greenfly, blackfly and aphid are back out in full force in the garden. And I would implore you, wherever possible, leave these populations to explode. Now I know they look really scary and you know that they're drinking the sap of your young and tender plants, but without the populations exploding, you won't have anything to feed your beneficiary insects. So please do for now just leave them alone. You have my full assurances that unless a population of blackfly, greenfly or aphids gets really out of hand and heads into the hundreds of thousands, your plant will be absolutely fine. Yes, there will be some damage, and yes, some leaves will curl, and yes, you will get a little bit of mildew and mould growing on the honeydew that they excrete. But for now, please just leave them alone. Greenfly, blackfly and aphid make up one of the largest cornerstones of your garden's ecological systems and are massive sources of food for lacewings, hoverfly larvae, obviously ladybirds and very small foraging birds. So please don't even be tempted to wash these off or crush them between your forefingers and thumbs. Leave them instead just to go about their business. The birds and predatory insects will soon be along to feast upon this bounty as the population explodes. And please bear in mind that the life cycle of things like ladybirds takes a couple to 3 weeks to actually catch up. And a ladybird larvae has a ferocious appetite, finishing off hundreds of aphids in just one day and travelling metres and metres around your garden. So do just let these populations explode over the next couple of weeks, and I assure you, if you hold your ground, the birds and predatory insects will do all the work your pesticides and your hosepipe can do in just a matter of moments. This subject brings us really nicely to this week's guest. I have the pleasure in talking to Becky, who is the name behind the Instagram and YouTube account Sow Much More. Becky is a keen plants person, ecologist, botanist and freelance garden writer, and the author of the new book Grow a New Garden, which has recently just been released. Becky is hugely passionate about everything to do with soil and a wealth of information on the subject. So if you're bored about hearing me talk about organic gardening practices and why you should apply mulches to your garden, listen to Becky talk about it in a much more scientific way. I'm going to let Becky and the interview we did a couple of weeks ago do the talking. Well, on today's episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Becky, the name behind the account on Instagram, So Much More. Becky, hi, and welcome along to the podcast. How are you today?
Hello. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Um, do you know what? Today I feel absolutely amazing. I'm not going to deny that. Today I feel really good.
Oh,
And I know we
good.
don't always feel great, but today I'm going to say I feel great. So thank you very much for asking. Becky, you make me dizzy. I'm going to say that. You are involved, you've got your fingers in so many different pies. For those that don't follow along and don't know who you are, tell the audience listening what it is that you do and what it is that you're sharing.
Okay, so I'm Becky and I am a garden writer, but I also do just gardening in general. So I would consider that I'm mainly a gardener, but I started off as an ecologist. So everything
Okay.
I do in the garden comes from my ecology background. So I like to ask questions when people tell other people and tell me through books and conversations that you should do that in your garden. I like to ask why and work out whether there is actually a sort of scientific reason or whether this is another one of the, you know, anecdotal pieces of gardening advice that we get handed down over the generations that quite often become obsolete when our scientific understanding catches up with
So
these things.
is there
So
fabric to the wives' tale?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And quite often there is, but I just think it's really fascinating. So yeah, I like to ask why, and then I like to understand the sort of processes behind. So I tie that in with most of my writing. I write for Kitchen Garden magazine and Gardener's World magazine,
Hmm.
um, and I do freelancing for lots of other magazines as well. And I have just written a book called Grow a New Garden, which is all about my kind of journey of basically moving house more times than the average person.
Now,
um,
we'll get back to that in a minute because I'm sure I can trump you.
I'm not sure you can, but okay. And so I kind of put all the ecology thing into that. And then I suppose my main area of interest nowadays is soil.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm very interested in soil. I'm the soil expert for Gardener's World magazine, and I just really like everything to do with soil.
Wonderful. I think this is why I've been drawn so heavily towards your account over the last few years, because again, I mean, we don't want to talk disrespectfully about an awful lot of accounts and an awful lot of other stuff on social media, but there is an awful lot of noise and there's people chucking cinnamon on things and doing all sorts of
Yeah,
weird and wonderful things, and you don't I sometimes look at it and think, I can't be bothered to interact with this, but it's the but why, which I pride myself on
yeah,
trying to I don't know. I suppose education is the right word, but trying to give the insight to my followers and my subscribers on every platform why we do things, because often there is a really good reason why we do it. And if they don't,
yeah,
it's no good just sort of waving your hand and your finger over someone, you must do X, Y, and Z, and this is why how we do it. But actually, the science behind it is where I find the little golden nuggets of information, the gems, which I really love. So I think that's why I'm drawn to, and I'm a huge fan of soil as well. And
excellent.
being an organic gardener, telling people that, okay, if you apply this mulch, your soil will hold 30% more water and it will drain better. And they kind of look at you as if you sort of said something completely untoward. And it's like, well,
Lost the
actually,
plot.
no, yeah, it does work. And if you trust the process, it really does work. So I'm
Yeah,
really glad, really pleased to talk to somebody else that has the same sort of theory behind things as myself. So
yeah.
come on, we're gonna have to find out how many times have you moved?
I actually don't know. I've never counted it.
Oh dear.
Um, it's a lot.
Okay, you've been.
And I very determinedly built a garden in basically everywhere. So, but in the last few years, I have moved one, two, three, four, about five times in the last 10 years. So
Okay, well, it's quite a lot. So, have you put down some permanent roots now? Are you going to be staying
I
still
hope
for a little
so.
while?
I hope so, yeah.
There's a little bit of tentative in your voice. Where's that coming from?
Well, I thought with the other places that I was going to be staying there as well. So it's just been a series of sort of, I would say, mixed fortunes, some of it fortunate and some of it less fortunate.
Uh-huh.
That's meant that I move on quite quickly. But we've just had a loft conversion in this house, so I'm hoping that that means we can stay here for a
Okay.
bit longer.
Okay. All right.
And I've got an allotment just over the road as well, which is
Oh, so
perfect.
perfect. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Lovely.
yeah.
It's funny actually because the last garden I created before the one here at North Lodge was supposed to be my garden. Again, I that was in a rented house, and we had sort of assurances from the landlord that if we didn't buy the house, we weren't going anywhere. It was ours to stay in until we. Anyway, that didn't happen, and we came
Mm,
here, and I created the garden here at North Lodge. We didn't actually buy the house. We weren't really interested in the house at all. We got to a point where we could buy, and we said, right, I want to buy a garden and a plot. So we bought us basically as much land as we could afford to buy, which was a third of an
perfect. Yeah.
acre. And I've spent the last sort of 6, 7 years creating my incredibly complex. I mean, I've created a stately home garden on a miniature scale. I mean, I've got everything from fruit and vegetables to a cutting garden to pleached limes and wild areas with my wildflower meadow and other bits and
Fabulous.
pieces. But then I laid the last paving slab in my new terrace, and then I looked at my husband, and he said, "This is not enough for you." And I said, "No, it's not. It's not big enough. I'm going to need something else." So we haven't put the idea of moving to bed. And I feel quite proud of what I've created here, but it is difficult. So the gardens you've created, maybe this is an interesting subject for us to talk to people about. The advice you can give to someone who maybe, for instance, is living in a rented property or may be aware that they might not be staying in a property for too long because they may outgrow it for whatever reason. Can you
Mhm.
maybe give a few ideas about how you've created the gardens in your previous properties that you've lived in and how you've got to enjoy your spaces quite quickly?
Yeah, so I think it's depended somewhat on the space because sometimes I mean the house that I was in prior sorry the house that I was in prior to this house, um the budget was very, very low.
Hmm.
So there's one overarching principle which goes on all of the gardens, and that is starting with the soil.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sound a little bit like a cracked record, but I am really into soil. um, so I think the main thing is to start with the soil. And like you said with the mulch, it's really, really important to add that organic matter because most soils, whether they are clay, sand, silt, loam, whatever it is, most soils are depleted in organic matter.
Yeah.
And that
And
organic matter helps to feed the plants, it helps to increase the infiltration, it helps to increase aeration in the soil. And if you don't have enough organic matter in the soil, whatever you plant into it is going to struggle.
yeah,
So that was always the first thing.
and that's happened for a series of reasons, isn't it? I mean, one most new build houses now they strip the soil from around the
Hmm.
entire area where they build. They
Yep,
then build and then they backfill with soil, which obviously is all sort of mixed up. It can be a mixture of subsoil, it can be a mixture of grit and gravel, and
yep,
obviously rubble. And over the last sort of 30, 40, 50 years, the culture in gardening has been to extend the home into the garden and make gardens tidy and
yep,
clinical, which
yep.
obviously has a huge detrimental effect on the actual quality of the soil. We're out there and we're programmed. Well, I'm not. I mean, you're not by the sound of things, but everybody else is sort of programmed to tidy up and clear away and add a non-organic, well, not an organic mulch, but a permanent mulch, a stone or a grit or a gravel, which
Yeah,
obviously is null and void of any sort of nutritional value
yeah.
whatsoever. So we've had this huge problem. So yeah, by starting with the soil. So what are you doing when you move into a house? Are you doing some soil testing, some digging, some that sort of
Not usually, no.
no?
So there's no digging.
Yep.
So I make a point of not digging the soils because I believe in the soil structure building itself.
Hmm.
And because the soil's an ecosystem, digging the soil is kind of a little bit like going into a forest and cutting down all the trees to help the forest, you know. Um, that's how I see digging, really. Obviously, there are some circumstances that where you do need to do some digging.
Hmm.
I just set up an allotment over the road from my house, and the allotment is on a very steep slope, which is great for my fitness because I'm constantly having to wheel wheelbarrows all the way up this big old hill.
But you now got
Um,
one leg longer than the other.
Yeah, that's it.
You,
But I've created terraces on the allotment, and of course you have to dig to create something like a terrace.
hmm.
Of course, if you're going to plant a tree, if you're going to plant a shrub, whatever it is, you've got to dig a hole in order to be able to put them in. But this sort of large scale soil disturbance that most gardeners sort of I suppose, feel like they have to do.
Yes.
And certainly the culture in gardening over the last 100 years has been that you go outside, you dig over your soil in spring, and then it's ready, you know.
Yeah.
And I think we need to shift that to we leave our soils alone, we mulch it, and then it's ready.
I get,
Um,
I get a little, I'm so it's so lovely to talk to you because again, I get to the point where I don't think I have any breath left with this because I just say to people, pile the mulch on top of it, whatever you're going to use, and leave it for, I don't know, 6, 8 weeks, whatever it might be, and the soil will do the work for you. The creatures will come up, the bacteria will come, drag the stuff down into the soil.
yeah,
And again, when I'm digging live on camera here now, and I do several live streams when I, for instance, I'm planting roses, and people say your soil's like butter. It's like I haven't touched it. All I've done is mulch it and mulch it and mulch it, and the soil has done all the work for me. It's now crumbly, it's open, there's plenty of oxygen in it. There's organic matter all the way down for 12, 15, 18 inches into the soil when I dig. So people think they're being lazy, but it's just the easiest way of doing it. It's the right way of doing it.
that's it. Yeah, and I think it does come down to this laziness thing. People want to I think gardening and hard work are often associated with one another.
Yeah.
And so you don't really feel like you're doing it right unless you've done some hard work. And almost gardening sort of it feels like it should be hard work. You feel like you should come in dripping with sweat at the end of the day and covered in soil, and you can absolutely do that with no dig gardening as
Yeah.
well. You just put your efforts elsewhere, really. um so yeah, I do think we need this huge shift. And that's always the first thing that I start with. So in my book, which is coming out on the 3rd of April,
Yeah.
there is a whole chapter.
Available to pre-order. We must get that, and we're available
Yeah,
to
it's
pre-order. Yeah.
available to pre-order, and pre-orders do really help authors as well. So if you are able to order, that's perfect. But there is a whole chapter on soil, and what I try to do is I try to educate people as to how the soil actually works as an ecosystem.
Hmm.
So how it releases nutrients to plants, how it aerates itself, how adding mulch helps, and all those things, so that people can kind of visualize it. And I think understanding how the process works then helps people to trust the process.
Yes.
Because if you just say it works, then quite a lot of people go, but what if it doesn't? Whereas if you explain all of what the organisms do in simple terms, so it's not really overwhelming, that people can go, I know what's happening here, and I know that I have to be patient. I know that it's going to happen because I can't understand how it could not happen now that I know how it works.
Yeah.
So so yeah, that's a whole chapter in my book, and I'm hoping that my next book might be a whole book on that subject.
Well, when I was at college, one of the largest books that was most difficult to get hold of was called "The Nature and Properties of Soils," and
Oh.
it was part of the largest module of my qualification. And there was only one copy in our library, but very
Mm.
luckily, my grandparents bought me a copy of that book. It's very, very rare, and I have that. Well, actually, I have that holding up the bed. Actually, I think it's underneath the bed. But that was a very, very rare book. I suppose I should see whether on eBay whether that's worth any money because I don't need it anymore. But again, that talks an awful lot about the charge of the platelets and how different nutritional values were attached to negative and positive ions and
Yeah,
all of those bits and pieces. And as soon as you start talking about that, everybody just sort of they glaze over and you can
they
just see
switch
them like,
off. Yeah.
yeah. But it's really, really important. So
Well,
that's
I actually don't talk very much about that. So I don't talk about the inorganic properties of soil,
Mhm.
because they are the properties within the soil that you can't change.
Mhm.
So obviously it's important to know what they are. So it's important that you know whether you've got clay or sand or something in between. But most people know that just from going outside. Either you
Yes.
come home 6 inches taller because all the mud stuck to your boots, or you have to go out and water every 30 seconds in the
Yeah,
summer because it's so sandy and well drained. Or you are that smug person who can grow anything because your soil is nice loamy
that's
soil.
me.
And yeah, and it looks like when Monty Don puts a spade into the ground, and and it just sort of works, whereas the majority of gardeners don't have that experience with their
No,
soil at
quite.
all. So what you can change in your soil is you can change the organic matter content, and that's by adding mulch. And then what happens then with the organisms in the soil obviously happens on a much faster scale than anything geological. Um, and so it's really fascinating from the actual ecology of the soil point of view, and how the soil works as an ecosystem.
Hmm.
And that is the bit that I try and talk about, and that's the bit that we focused on in the book, and that's the bit really that only understanding of soil has only really just started to catch up with. And in the last couple of decades, we've only just started to understand how this works. So it's kind of quite cutting edge, I would say.
Yeah.
It's also very difficult to communicate to people because nobody really wants to hear about soil.
But it's also not, it's not
So
particularly visually beautiful either. It's not very
no,
aspirational,
exactly.
isn't it?
Exactly. When I write articles about it, it's always, I think we should get this one illustrated rather than let's just have a bunch of pictures of soil to go with the article. So yeah, it's definitely quite difficult to communicate about it. But once you actually get a bit of a spark of enthusiasm about soil, it's really, really fascinating. And I find that when I go to gardening clubs and stuff, and actually start talking about how the soil ecosystem works, people do get really excited and really interested. So it's brilliant. Even the people who've been double digging their gardens and their vegetable patches for the last 20 years suddenly start shifting in their seats
And realised there
and
was
getting
another
getting
way.
really excited, and then they ask 10 or 15 questions at the end of the talk. So yeah, it's great, it's really good. So
Well,
we
that's
just need
that's
to start spreading the word.
that's really lovely to hear, because I'm assuming soil-wise we've got a huge amount of damage to unwind as well, as we talked about earlier. That well, we've starved our soils of so much organic matter, especially in the domestic garden, that actually I suppose we've got an awful lot of damage to repair from the last 50, 60 years.
That's it, and that's why I say that most soils are depleted in organic matter, because um, even if you are adding lots and lots of organic matter, just digging the soil can break down the organic matter, because a lot of the organic matter that's held in the soil is well, it's what I call the alive, the dead, and the very dead.
Hmm.
So the very dead is anything that's passed through an organism,
Yes.
and then of
So,
course
for instance, a worm cast, is that the kind of thing you're
worm
talking about? Yeah.
castings, yeah, that kind of thing. And also there's lots and lots of organic glues in the soil. So the glues are what hold the structure of the soil together, and they are produced by bacteria and by fungi. So bacteria produce these tiny little polysaccharides, which are like sticky sugars. So they just excrete these sticky sugars, and as they're moving around, bear in mind bacteria don't move very far. They can only move a couple of millimeters in their entire lifespan. So if they want to go an inch away on holiday, they've got to do it over about 20 generations. Um, so as they're moving through the soil, they're sticking the most tiny particles of the soil together. And then fungi comes in and excretes another sticky substance called glomalin, which sticks those particles again to slightly less tiny particles. And then the fungal hyphae, the strands of fungi that exist under the soil, come and tie all those together. And what you end up with is the particles becoming closer to one another. And that's what forms something called PEDs, as gardeners know them as PEDs. And that's the lovely crumbly stuff.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like when you make the top of an apple crumble, you know, when you if you just mix sugar and flour together, it's just going to be sugar and flour. You know,
Hmm.
it's never going to stick together. As the moment you add butter, and you can think of that as like the organic matter in the
Yeah.
soil, the moment you add the butter, you start getting that nice fluffy texture. You start sticking things together, and a lot of gardeners and a lot of people think that to get a fluffy texture, you have to bash it all apart.
Yeah.
But
Break it
actually,
apart and turn it, and
yeah,
let the frost, or for instance, or the weather get to it. Yeah.
exactly. And actually, the that lovely structure is made by it all binding together. And when you dig it, what happens is that those little tiny glues, the polysaccharides and the glomalins, and the fungal hyphae are all completely broken down. So they're all really sensitive to UV light. So they just disappear and they are released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which is on a global scale is a disaster. You know, you think about all the farmers ploughing their fields and stuff.
Hmm.
It is a full scale disaster because then the plants have to come along and pull all the carbon dioxide back out of the air.
Put it back in
Um,
the soil
but
again.
yeah, exactly. But even if you are digging in a load of manure, you can never replace the amount of organic matter that you've just released by simply digging the soil. And then, of course, once you've dug the soil, it does feel nice and light and crumbly, but it gets less light and crumbly as the year progresses, and then it needs doing again. And then, of course, you are breaking that down year upon year. But the great thing about this is that if you decide that you want to start looking after the soil and getting the soil to look after you, really, is that all the things that live in the soil, like the fungal hyphae and the bacteria, the protozoa, the nematodes, all those kind of things, they they reproduce at really astonishing rates. You know, they really can fill in an area very, very quickly. So the problem that we have is that because we are disturbing the soil, sort of, you know, the traditional gardening advice is to dig over our beds if we're growing annuals and vegetables and things like that, is to dig our beds over once a year.
Hmm.
And that's when it really starts to cause the damage. If you start to leave it, then you'll find that the population of all of those things in the soil builds up quite quickly, and you can start benefiting from it in probably a year, 2 years' time, as long as you're adding enough organic matter.
Okay, so the repair can come about really quite quickly if we just,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's just again something I'm talking to people an awful lot about because obviously I'm myself obviously I'm a general horticulturalist with a huge horticultural background, but I've become known for my roses, and the
Hmm.
huge thing that I get is, oh my goodness, there's a population explosion of aphids. I've got to go out and deal with them. I've got to wash them off. I've got to squash them with my hands, or I've got to reach for the bug spray. And I'm like, no, 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 just calm down, hold your
Yeah.
ground, because if you
Yeah.
don't have a food source, for instance, you don't have
Exactly. Yeah.
organic matter in the soil, if you don't have a food source, for instance, the aphids, you won't have the beneficial insects that will come along and eat them. So just hold your ground for a
Yeah.
little bit, trust the process, because I can guarantee that just hold your ground, give it a couple of weeks, give it a couple of months, you'll be inundated by ladybirds and the problem will solve itself. So it's really nice to hear that it's not as bleak as it first might sound. Actually, if
Yeah.
we just stop the process and take a minute and have a look at the science behind it, we can repair a lot of the damage, and we can repair it really quite quickly.
Yeah, and it is really it does repair really quickly. And I think people, you know, I always say to people, if I don't intend to make people feel bad by talking about not digging their soils, because some people might feel as though they are, you know, oh, I'm doing, she's making me feel really guilty for digging, you know. And this is something that happens quite often with the no dig gardeners, is that they're seen as being perhaps a bit virtuous, and the diggers are going, oh gosh, those guys again, you know, holier than thou. um and that's not it at all, really, because they're just following the advice that was out there. But given that science now understands how these processes are all working, it is now time for us to start listening to what scientists are saying. And of course, the problem with that is that often when scientists talk, nobody can understand them,
No,
because
quite.
because they specialize in one particular form of soil bacteria that does one particular really exciting thing in their lifetime, and that's what they talk about, rather than talking about the whole process or the whole ecosystem together. So it's just um, about sort of communicating it in a way that gardeners can understand, since gardeners and farmers, of course, are the ones who are actually looking after the soil.
Yeah,
So
quite.
yeah.
Okay. And you're sharing all this kind of information on your YouTube and your blog.
Yes, so I do. I haven't really done an awful lot on my blog. There is certainly some things on my blog. I've been quite busy actually because
I
of
can imagine you have been, yeah.
writing, all the magazine writing that I do, and also because I've not just written a book, I've also written a sort of collector's item, I suppose. It's called the Seed Collector's Kit, which
Yes.
is a set of 50 cards. I believe you were in receipt of one of these kits. Um,
Yes, I have,
and
yeah.
and so it's 50 cards, and each one tells you how to save the seeds
So,
from that plant and then how to
now,
sow them again.
sorry, bear with me 1 second. Ethel, go and lie in your bed. Go on. This hasn't happened on a recording before, so I do apologise. That was a
That's okay.
doorbell.
That's okay. Are we good to go again?
Yeah, fine, lovely. Thank you. So yeah, that was incidentally for those listening along. That was some more roses because Ben really needs more roses. That was another deliberate. So I do apologise for the interruption.
More, yet
More,
more
yeah,
roses.
because there's now 70 roses for personal review this coming June and
Right.
July. I can't believe I'm doing this. What am I doing with my life? I'm starting to really question my life choices. Anyway, we go back to it. I apologise. We were talking about your lovely collection of 50 cards.
Yes, so it's just in a little box, and there's a booklet that comes with it that tells you all about seed saving, how to choose the right varieties, etc. And it's just a way of kind of teaching people about seed saving. And the selection of plants might seem a little bit strange, but it's to try and showcase as many different plants as possible, so that you feel confident to transfer those skills to other plants,
Yeah.
and you basically feel like you can save seeds from pretty much anything, as long as it's as long as it's okay to save the seeds from that, and that's all covered in the set as well. So
Because
so
let's
I have
face
been
it,
very busy.
because let's face it, that's one of the things that I think the cost of gardening. I mean, as I was talking to Rob just a couple of days ago about the sort of heritage and heirloom varieties of tomato that you can pay up to £5, £6 for up to 3 or 4 seeds, and
Yeah,
and you look at it, and then goodness me, that I would like to grow, I don't know, 3 or 4 different types of tomatoes to sort of make a beautiful dish with, and you look at the price of those, and it can get very expensive. So it's again, that's a really nice thing for you to have shared with people, that actually you
yeah,
can heavily reduce the cost of things by
that's it.
saving seeds and putting them away for later.
That's it. And
And again,
hopefully with those heirloom and heritage varieties, the great thing is that it is only a one-time investment. So you're buying those seeds once, and then after that, providing that you know what you're doing with collecting seeds, and you can make sure that you aren't sort of crossing them with other um, varieties, and there's plenty of information on that in the box. Um, then you can just carry on growing those varieties. Never need to buy the seeds again. So yeah.
again, because I want to give you the opportunity, I want to make sure people have the information they need. Those you can actually, if you go over to your Instagram account, for instance, so much more, you can use the little drop down box, and then you've got a link tree there, and all of those items people can find directly from there. Is
Yeah,
that right? Yeah.
that's right. And it's available from most major retailers and stuff. So yeah, it's called the Seed Collector's Kit, that one.
So no, I can fully understand why you're incredibly busy. And obviously you are trying, well, not trying, but you've taken on a new allotment, and you've got
Yep,
a relatively new garden at home. It's only a
yep.
couple of years old now. So
hmm
you've got plenty to get on. So what are you growing in the garden right now?
So the garden is mostly perennials, which this time of year I really regret because there's not very much to see.
Oh, see,
Um,
I love my garden at this time of year, because it's almost for a while it's all looking fairly sort of barren, and then all of a sudden
yeah,
it's then astonishes me just how quickly it erupts and how quickly
it's incredible, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I've got lots of perennials, and I've actually been saving a lot of seeds from those perennials because I've got a front garden as well, which is very, very small. But my aim with my front garden is to not spend any money on it at all.
Hmm.
So I've been dividing perennials, I've been saving seeds, sowing seeds, and trying to basically get all of the plants from the back garden into the front garden now. So
Yeah.
it's just about, but the beds in the front garden are really big because it's basically all bed. Um, so I've got my work cut out for me, but it's a challenge that I'm willing to accept. But anybody who comes around to my house thinks that I'm not a very good gardener because the front garden's quite empty and it's still got all the car park plants that the house came with. Um, and then the back garden looks very, very, very different. So
So you've got your standard lavender, you've got your standard rosemary, some cotoneaster chucked in there, and some
yeah, well, this
ceanothus
is it.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there's lots of well, there's a massive great robin plant. I'm forgetting the name of it.
A Photinia.
Um,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, and oh
I
yeah,
hate
it's
them. I
just
really do, and
beautiful.
I'm not going to be scared to say it. I really don't like them at all. They
Yeah, me
never. They.
neither.
I don't think they ever look nice. I mean, everybody says
No.
all the tips are lovely, yes, but then most people plant them as hedges or as lollipops, and then you have to clip all the nice red bits off,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
they produce flowers, which are once again quite pretty, but again because everybody wants them as a hedge or a ball or something
yeah.
formal,
They get
everybody
clipped.
cuts them all off, and then
Yeah.
they drop all their leaves, and they look all bare and no, I can't get behind them at all. I'm afraid I just can't.
Yeah, I mean mine don't drop their leaves thankfully, but they because I don't like clipping them. I have to clip them a little bit because they're right in front of our living room window, but they're
Okay.
sort of starting to engulf the living room. But my plan is that once I've got enough plants that I've propagated from the ones in the back garden, I can just take those out
Yeah.
and somebody will want them. So I'm not just going to dispose of them, but somebody who's building a hedge somewhere will want them. So yeah, my plan is to just kind of phase those car park plants
Oh,
out.
well, again,
But
it
yeah,
also proves that you don't have to grow a new garden really quickly. See what I did there. I used the title of your
yeah,
book.
thank you.
Um, you don't have to do it really quickly, and you can grow into your space slowly, and you can do it in a cost-effective way.
Yeah,
The
that's
only,
it.
I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but one of the things that I often say to people, because obviously I've got a third of an acre here. It's a substantial. And we brought a lot of
Yeah,
plants with us from our last garden that
I'm not
people
jealous
say.
at all.
Well,
I am.
people often say that oh, it must be great because you can get this and this and this, and you must divide and replicate that again. It's like, well, again, try not to replicate the stuff that grows really quickly. And it is very tempting to sort of look at, for instance, phlox and go, oh my goodness, I planted a little 3 litre plant, and now 2 years later, I've got a clump that's 18 inches in diameter. Yes, I could dig that up and I could split that and put that somewhere else in the garden. But actually, all you end up doing if you do that with the stuff that generates really quickly is have the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah, that's it.
Actually,
Yeah.
little bit of take a little bit of time with it, take a little bit and only divide what you want to do. And I give loads and loads away, and I've met some really lovely local gardeners by divide, because the hostas absolutely love it here. I literally I can't keep up with the hostas. I
Oh
have to
gosh,
lift and
lucky
divide them
you.
every 2 or 3 years, and literally not chuck them away, but give away two-thirds of what I
Yeah.
had in the ground because
Oh,
they
lucky
grow
you.
so quickly. That yeah, so I have to give them away. So I often say to people, take your time and only divide and replicate the ones that you really like, or the ones that
Yeah,
that you
that's
want
it.
to keep. Otherwise, you end up with a garden that just basically looks all the one color.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, I'm going to put this in inverted commas. I benefited from the fact that when I moved into my house, there was no plants in the garden at all,
Okay.
bar three mature birch trees at the back. Um, and so there was absolutely nothing. So every single plant in the garden I chose myself,
Hmm.
which is great because it was a totally blank canvas. Um, and apart from the car park plants in the front, that is, which will be gotten rid of. So thankfully for me, all of the plants in my garden I really like,
Yeah.
and I think they work quite well together. I've kind of sat down and chose them, and this is, I think, one thing that quite a lot of people, quite a lot of gardeners neglect to do is to plan. And really, when you plan, you can make a garden look much more coherent than if you just buy things piecemeal, and or you just go to the garden centre and pick something up and think, oh, that looks nice, I'll buy that. um of course we all do that, don't we? But it really does make a huge difference when you can plan and you can decide what you want that bed or that area of the garden to look like, and then sort of follow that plan with however long it takes. That can be a 5-year plan, but at least you've got a plan.
Yes, yeah, and a
So
direction.
I do
And
think
I
that makes a big difference.
quite often tell people, because obviously I'm a professional landscaper and professional gardener, I've been doing it for
Yeah,
just over 30 years, that you don't have to completely fill a bed or a border of a garden instantly. Most people
that's it.
will wake up at this time of year, and we're heading to that dangerous period of the year that Easter is looming, and everybody will, the sun, the shorts will come out, the strappy tops will come out, the flip-flops will come out, and they will head to the garden centre in their millions
Yeah,
and buy whatever the garden centre puts in front of them. And
that's it.
that's
Yeah,
what they will plant in their garden. And the biggest thing I hear about after about 18 months, 2 years of someone on a new build garden is it's really boring. And it's like,
yeah,
well, again, you went to I don't want to be critical, but you went to the garden centre and you filled the garden with everything that was in flower in late April and May, and it looked great until probably the end of June. And then it got really boring. And then because
yeah,
you'd spent all of your budget, you spent all of your money in that first initial garden centre visit, you've kind of lost interest in it. I say to people, actually, if you don't know what you're doing, people like myself and yourself, if you don't know what you're doing, the easiest way of doing this is actually divide whatever budget you're prepared to spend in your garden over a year and visit
yeah,
the garden centre or nursery or online plant store, wherever it might be, about once or twice every 2 months,
yeah.
and buy one or two
That's
little
it.
bits and smatter them about your garden, and then
Exactly.
continue the mix. So you don't have to fill the whole border in, just plant 25% of it. And then in
Yeah,
about 3 months' time, come back and plant another 25% of it. And that really basically gives you a fool's guide to having a garden with interest all year round, because the garden centre or plant store will put in front of you what is interesting at any one point in
yeah.
time. So if you slow your process down and don't fill your whole space, actually, and do it in several chunks, that you can actually create a garden very easily without having to do a lot of the research if you don't know what you're doing, but
That's
just by
it.
slow
Yeah.
and keep the money in the bank for a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, gardening it's not just about thinking about things that like sun and things that like shade and things that like clay and things that like well-drained soil, and it's about trying to think about all of those things in time as well as in space. And it is really complicated, like you say. And yeah, so the best thing to do is literally to just go to the garden centre sort of throughout the year and choose things that are in flower.
Mhm.
And I always say that don't just buy one of those things. If it's something that you like and you know it's going to enjoy the conditions of your garden, as long as you know what the conditions of your garden are, buy a couple of them. Buy 3, buy 5, buy 7, so that you can create little communities, and it just all looks a little bit more coherent. And no, I am actually going to raise my hand and say I'm not a garden designer. I don't claim to be a garden designer. But so when I wrote this book, I actually did what I do when I create a new garden, which is phone my friend who is a garden designer, and get some advice from him. And so what I did in this section of Grow a New Garden was get advice from my friend Kenny, who is the head gardener at Covent Garden. And
I saw Kenny just a couple of days ago. The
yeah,
very the
Kenny's
very lovely
fabulous.
Kenny. Yeah.
Yeah, Kenny Raybould, and he's just wonderful. He's so knowledgeable.
Lean
And
on him,
so
would
what
you? Because
I
lean on him. I'd love him to
exactly.
join me on the podcast, but I know at the moment he's not using social media at the moment, and I
Yeah,
understand fully why. But no, I'd love him. I'd love him to come on the podcast and have a chat with me on that. But yeah, give him a little lean.
yeah, he's fabulous. But so what I always do when I'm starting a garden is give Kenny a call and go, I don't know what I'm doing, can you help me? And then and Kenny gives me a load of advice. And so when I was writing the book, I said, instead of writing what I would do in the process, I'm going to be authentic about this, and I'm going to say I don't know what I'm doing. So this is what Kenny told me.
Don't,
So
but
we
don't be
did
afraid of
Kenny's
taking. But don't be afraid of taking
exactly.
advice where it's available.
Exactly. And so we did Kenny's top tips. And so Kenny basically broke down his many years of garden design knowledge and his just fabulous wealth of knowledge, and just broke it down into what he would tell me when I was designing a garden. Um, and have we've given that to people in the book so that it's not overwhelming. It's kind of quite simple to follow, and it doesn't make it seem really outrageously complicated,
Mhm.
hopefully. So
Well, of course,
yes,
and of course
thank you, Kenny.
and of course he's managing something that's incredibly complicated over a very large area. With, I think he told me the other day that they were talking about like 1,000 window boxes and installations. I mean, it's mind-boggling how you'd
Yeah,
keep up with all of that,
yeah,
and some incredibly large budgets, and
yeah.
just yeah. I mean, again, I can imagine it being incredibly rewarding, but very difficult not to sort of disappear under the sea of it. I mean, it's
That's it, yeah.
and with a
But
relatively
Kenny
small.
also has he also has this quite small garden himself at home, so
Oh, it's utterly
he's
fabulous as
got,
well. Yes, yeah.
yeah, and he's got this balance of being able to talk about, using these huge budgets for Covent Garden, and doing these really quite fantastic installations, and then the flip side of that is developing his own garden where he's only got a few square meters, and he
Yes.
just makes every single tiny inch of it count, and it just looks amazing.
Well, he makes me very jealous
So
because
yeah.
he's got more tree ferns than me, and it's very
Yeah.
unfair. I feel very
I think
tree
he's got more
fern.
tree ferns than anyone.
He makes me feel very tree fern poor, and that's a very
Yeah.
entitled thing to say, but I'm very upset about that.
I'm sure you can just go let yourself in through the back gate and pinch a few of
Oh,
them.
that
But
wouldn't
don't
be
tell him I
fair, would
said
it? And
that.
I would get in a lot of trouble here at home as well. I think I've been banned and forbidden to having any more tree ferns, and I'm not allowed any more olives either, which is again
Oh,
very unfair. I don't like that
dearie
at all.
me. No, you don't need that kind of negativity in your life.
Well, I think I've probably pushed the boundary just a little bit too far. I think yeah, I think I've probably stretched my luck a little bit too far with that.
I haven't got any tree ferns here. I used to have one in an old garden,
And you didn't
and
take it with you?
I sadly did not get the chance.
Okay.
So I had to leave in a bit of a hurry, and didn't get a chance to take any of the plants with me, unfortunately. So I had a huge collection I had a quarter of an acre. It was full.
Yeah,
So unfortunately have had to start from scratch. I would love a tree fern, but since I purchased that tree fern about 10 years ago, the prices of them have shot up.
they have indeed.
Um,
Yes, yeah.
so if somebody would like to send me a tree fern, I'd be very happy. But for now, I'm going to be saving up.
And can I add my list and my name to that list as well? If anybody wants to send me a tree fern, please.
Yeah, if anybody's happen to be giving them away. I was just at the Lost Gardens of Heligan actually,
Oh,
2 days
wonderful.
ago. Yeah, and the tree ferns there are just absolutely superb. There's so many of them. It's wonderful. It's like being in New Zealand.
I've never been, and keep confessing to being a really, really terrible horticulturalist because I don't tend to leave my own house or leave my own business, and I'm very rarely seen. I'm a little bit elusive. I'm not very often seen in public, and when I am seen in public at a garden or a show or something, I get a little bit socially anxious and run away and hide. But I really must make more efforts to get out and see more of the wonderful gardens, especially the UK has to offer, because I've never been
Yeah,
to the gardens that you've just talked about. So I really must get down and have a look. And again,
yeah,
I came up in another episode that I hadn't been to Hidcote, and I hadn't been to I hadn't been to Great Dixter, and everybody's sort of
yeah.
they're raising an eyelid at me and sort of thinking, oh, okay, maybe his caliber's not as high as he says it is. No idea. I am qualified. Just don't get time.
Just busy, yeah, this is
Yeah.
it. Well, yeah, I took a couple of days actually and did the Eden Project and the
Oh,
Lost
I
Gardens of
saw. Yes,
Heligan,
yeah. Yeah.
and
Again, I
then
haven't
went
been.
to the soil exhibition at Somerset House as well. So I've had a little tour this week, which has been
Yeah.
lovely.
You've been out and about in your natural habitat, sharing bits and
That's it,
pieces with you.
exactly. But it is lovely going to other gardens and seeing what people do, and seeing combinations of plants that catch your eye, and seeing, for me, what I really love is seeing how the gardens are treating their soil. And I like going to the Eden Project and thinking, oh, good, they're doing no dig.
Yeah.
And then seeing that some parts of some of the RHS gardens are now no dig. Most of them are obviously not needing to be dug, but they are using mulches, and they are doing a lot of really, really positive things now. And that's been a change that I've seen over the last 10 years. So it's really great. I really like it. I like checking in, and I actually went round RHS Rosemore last year with a soil corer,
Hmm.
and took loads of soil samples from all over the garden with permission from the RHS. And that was fascinating, just absolutely fascinating, especially when comparing it with their different management styles of the
So
different
am I
gardens.
correct in am I correct in thinking that the soil at Rosemore is famed for being really quite terrible?
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to say this, but the soil at Rosemore would be terrible had they
Yeah.
not shipped it out and replaced it with soil that's not terrible.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, my opinion of that is only coming obviously from a particular variety, Rosemore, a rose by David Austin Roses, which
Yeah,
was launched because it grew particularly well. It was trialed at Rosemore, and it performed incredibly well on a very free draining, sandy, rubbly soil with not a huge amount of meat behind it.
yeah.
That was
So
the only reason where that comment's coming from. That's from my limited understanding.
the natural soil at Rosemore would actually be clay.
Yes. Okay.
Um, but they dug it out and they replaced the soil at Rosemore
Okay.
because
That's
the soil was so bad.
okay.
So
All right.
yeah, and they've obviously they then used different soils for the different gardens that they needed for, depending on what they wanted to grow there. So there is some areas that are still clay,
Yeah.
which you can tell because they're the areas that get really wet. And
And
then
again, a
the
lot of
rose
people,
gardens are the bits that they have much freer draining soil and stuff like that. So
and
yeah,
again, a lot of people are absolutely terrified that you can almost see them a bit being crestfallen when they say, I get messages and they say, I've got a really heavy clay soil, and they kind of go, oh. And it's like, well,
yeah,
actually, it's not as bad as you think it is. Again, cover it with mulch for 3 or 4 years in a row, and it will lighten up. And if you have to work it at the right time of year, and grow the plants that
yeah,
are right for you. And I
yeah,
can guarantee that actually, you're especially with the weather as it's becoming now. We're having much longer periods of time in the summer without any rain, up to 6 7 weeks here at one point a couple of years ago, which was doesn't sound long
yeah.
to a lot of people listening across the world, but
But
here
it
in the
is,
UK, it
yeah,
is catastrophic here in the UK.
yeah.
And obviously a clay soil will hold a lot more water. So actually, those people that are blessed with a clay soil, will, fine, they are difficult to work if you have to, and they do, do hold and they get a bit boggy during the winter. But actually, it's not bad. Just grow the right plants and cover it in mulch, and the situation's a little bit easier.
That's it. And actually, I would say that probably clay is probably the best kind of base to have. I mean, apart from loam, but really the difference between clay and loam is that loam obviously has a bit less clay in it, but loam is characterized by having a lot of organic matter. And you
Hmm.
can add organic matter to clay and build up the organic matter content, as we discussed already,
Yeah,
really very quickly.
yeah.
And so my allotment over the road was well is very heavy clay, and last year I couldn't even walk up the slope because I'd put one foot down and I'd slide backwards because it was really boggy and really sticky and really slippery. And this year, because I mulched with bark chip on the paths, so to give it a bit more stability, and compost on the beds, it's already looking so much better. And I literally started this allotment in January last year, and we're only in March
Yeah,
this year, and it's like a completely different place. I can walk around perfectly easily. There's no sticky, boggy bits at all, and there's no hard, dried out bits at all because of the mulch. So it really is very easy to work with. And then, as long as you don't have to dig it, which you don't have to dig it, and I would encourage people not to. And then clay is actually also really rich in nutrients because the nutrients come from the sediments in the soil, and clay has much higher nutrient content than a lot of the other things, and it doesn't get acidic like sand does as well. So clay is actually a really good starting point. You just need to add loads of organic matter,
yeah.
but
Fantastic.
not you need to do this over a period of time rather than just going, right, I'll ship in a foot deep of mulch. You really should not be doing more than a couple of inches of mulch at a time, because
Yeah,
otherwise you are ending up with a situation where those nutrients are going to leach out when it rains. You might create a soil obesity, which is kind of the organisms in the soil stop working with the plants and start just eating the compost,
yeah.
which is detrimental to our plants. So yeah, so try and add, when I say add lots of organic matter, I mean over a period of time. And
The
you can
prescribed
certainly mulch
the
twice a year
prescribed
if you want to.
the prescribed and
So
recommended amounts.
yeah, so I would say if you've got depleted soil, then in the first year, around 7 to 8 centimeters is just right. But following years, really 2 to 3 centimeters is more than enough.
Hmm.
So I try and what that looks like in practice is basically a coverage.
Yes.
So I'm just covering the surface. If you
Again,
don't have that,
we're going back to that apple crumble again, aren't we? We're going back to
exactly.
it. Yeah, yeah, a
And
decent layer.
what you do with that layer on top of the compost is we're recommending compost for sort of smaller, annual plants, vegetables, that kind of thing, because compost doesn't create habitat for woodlice, slugs, snails, etc. So if you just put raw organic matter on the surface of the soil, every slug in the whole of the country would come descending upon your space, and
Because
then
again,
you would really struggle.
everybody thinks that slugs and snails are attracted to fresh green growth, but it actually is completely the opposite.
Yeah,
They
that's it.
actually they gravitate towards dead organic matter. That's the stuff
That's
they
it,
want.
yeah.
That's the caffeine that they're really after. I'm
Yeah,
also
so
suggesting to people on a regular basis that, much like feeding yourself, you wouldn't eat just brown foods, and you just wouldn't eat cabbage over and over and over again forever and ever and ever. Actually, that to change up the what you're applying. So if you've used a soil conditioner or an organic compost, peat-free compost as a mulch, that actually you use that for a couple of years, and then you change it up. And if you can get hold of some well-rotted horse or cow manure, you can change it up for 1 year, or you can add some bark chippings on another year. That actually, just like human beings, your soil needs a whole manner of different things, and don't ever just use the same product over and over and over again, because again, it's these things contain normally the same sort of chemical compositions, and by adding different forms or different for instance, bark will break down a lot slower than, for instance, an organic compost. That actually, it changes ever so slightly, and you just want to feed it a sort of a multitude of colors and a multitude of textures over a period of years, not just the same thing.
yeah, I mean that it's kind of obviously adding sort of woodier things gives more structure, and adding softer stuff that comes mainly from green waste, that's going to give it more nutrients. But actually the key thing is plant diversity, because the soil organisms feed on carbohydrates and sugars that are pumped down through the roots of the plants, and the plants are able to come up with different um, formulas of carbohydrates and sugars to attract different communities of bacteria and fungi in the soil, which then in turn release different nutrients. So the nutrients are when they are in the soil, when they're in the compost, when they're in the sediments of the soil, they're really tightly bound, and so plants can't get hold of them at all. Although nitrogen is known for being soluble, so it just washes away when it's in sort of compost form, which is why we say don't add too much compost.
Hmm.
Um, but it's about feeding kind of carbon to the soil organisms, really, and then the plants are the ones that help to create the diversity. So if you don't have enough mulch, for example, using a cover crop will do the same thing. It will feed the organisms in the soil, it will build soil health. The key thing with that is then to just cut the cover crop, rather, and you have to choose your cover crops carefully, because some of them, if you cut them, they'll just come back. So I like to use field beans because they're a really good cover crop. If you cut them off at ground level and leave the roots to rot in situ, then you've added loads and loads of organic matter. They're really good at fixing nitrogen in the soil as well.
Hmm.
You've got loads of above ground matter to add to your compost heap for next year, and they're not just going to regenerate or spread all over your allotment and become a total nuisance, whereas some green manures will do that. And also the benefit of them is that they're very, very cold tolerant, so you can grow them over winter, which is usually when your beds are empty in the first place.
Yeah.
So I would say that in terms of creating really healthy soil, it's as much about the plant diversity as it is about what you're actually adding in terms of mulch. And if we can have live plants in the ground as much as possible and rotate to some extent, I don't really advocate for the normal crop rotation, but plant diversity is really important to soil diversity. So yeah.
That's a really interesting point to me. I think, Becky, you and I could talk on the subject of soils for hours and hours and hours on end, but I'm going
Quite
to ask you,
possibly, yes.
I'm going to, I'm going to ask you one question, which I've been asking all of the guests that have joined me on the podcast. Now, this is a difficult question to use, and it's had to be rephrased several times because my husband said it was a little bit too finite, a little bit too blunt. But if you could only grow, I mean, I've said, and I hate to, I also have to apologise if this is a little bit triggering for you, having moved so many times as well. But if you had to leave your house and you were only allowed to take one plant with you, what plant would it be and why?
I would take one of my roses. I
Really?
don't, I'm
Yay!
not saying that to cozy up to you in any way, but I think
What rose is it? Who is it?
well, that's a difficult choice. So I really like my rambling rector.
Okay, yeah.
He's one of my favorites. I actually, in every single garden that I've planted over the last 15 or so years, I've planted a rambling rector. So
Okay,
I'm responsible for quite a few rambling rectors across the
I had to
countryside.
abandon mine at my last house. It didn't come here. I
Okay,
went.
because it's too big.
Oh God, it was an absolute brute of a thing, and it was there was only about five plants that got left behind. Everything was either divided or came with us. But
Yeah,
Rambling Rector was one of the
he
ones that
stayed.
it
Yeah.
stayed.
Well,
And
and
I
the great thing is that there's, if you buy them as a bare root rose, they just grow so quickly, don't they? So you don't
yes, yeah.
really necessarily feel like you need to, apart from a money saving perspective. But
And why
yeah,
do you like Rambling Rector so much? What is it that's
it's
drawing you to that particular rose?
I think it's the open center. It's obviously really good for pollinators. I find that leafcutter bees really like Rambling Rector because it's got
Yeah.
quite soft leaves over some of the other roses that have got much sort of glossier leaves.
And again,
Um,
for people that aren't an ecologist or a botanist or an organic gardener, as you are, a lot of people go, "Why is Becky wanting to plant a rose that the bees like to eat and take away?"
yeah,
But of course, I mean, I'm a huge advocate the fact that I feel like a caretaker. The garden space that I have is not mine. I am a caretaker of it, and my job is to tend it and to look after it and bring as many different species into my garden as at all possible. And everybody and everything is welcome in my garden, and people find that
that's it.
very, very bizarre to hear as a gardener that you will welcome things that naturally eat things into your garden. It's like, no, it's not my space.
That's
They're
it.
all here doing what they do, and I love seeing them. So it's really nice to hear from yourself. So
Yeah, well, they
have you got a rambling rector in your current garden?
I have, yeah. That was the first
Yeah.
thing that went in actually when I moved in.
You've
Literally,
got a
quite
standard
literally the
order.
first thing.
Just
Yeah,
hit repeat
because I
order.
knew exactly. I knew that I was going to have another one. Um, and I also really love the new David Austin Emma Bridgewater rose,
Hmm.
of which I now have two.
Okay.
That's just a stunning flower. I've got a generous gardener that I really like, and a Paul's Himalayan musk, which is growing up through my birch trees at the back. So that's yeah, that one comes with a warning
Yeah, it does.
because
Again, it's
because
a
it's
bit.
very thorny and very large.
It's a bit of a
Um,
brute, yeah.
yeah, so yeah,
Well,
I think I probably from a practical perspective, I just take my Emma Bridgewater raise because it's a bit
okay.
smaller, a bit more
Okay,
compact.
my person, my per, my the audience listening were treated to my first impressions of that when it was launched in May of last year. My full personal review of that rose will be available June, July this year, along with, I say, 69 other different varieties that will go through my full review process. There are roses everywhere. I'm not growing vegetables this year. All of my beds have been taken up by people sending me roses to get me in front of. So yeah, I've got a very busy few years. And I'm actually, when I've finished a conversation with yourself for just a moment, I'm going to don my very long gauntlet gloves because I have to climb the henchman ladder and tie in my kith skate climbing rambling
Ah,
rose, which
lovely.
well, yes, I am regretting, but I am almost regretting planting it because it is such a bruiser of a thing. I don't
Yeah,
think any other rose has given me so many. well, it attacked me so often with the lawnmower. It sprawls off of the arch and the arbor that I gave it, and sort of spreads these great big tendrils across the lawn, which I quite often think, oh, I can push that out of the way, and then it bites me on the back of the head, or it bites
Yeah.
me on, yeah. So I'm going to tie that one in a minute. I've pruned it. I left it till last. I only pruned it. I'll openly admit I only pruned it about 10 days ago, but it is done. I now need to tie it in and get it under some sort
Yeah.
of control.
Good luck.
Becky, I think I'm going to need it. Becky, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you about absolutely everything soil related, ecologist and botany. And all, of course, best of luck with your book, which is obviously, I
Thank you
don't
very
think I need to
much.
wish you any luck because I've seen the front cover and you're beaming with it. You should be very proud of it. I'm starting the process myself. I was talking to Rob at Rob's Allotment about that just a week or two ago. I am starting the process myself. So
Oh,
I
very
have to.
exciting.
Well, I'm terrified and very excited at the same time, and a little overwhelmed, and trying not to be, not to get in my own head about it. So I can only sort of tip my hat to you and say welcome and congratulations. That's available for pre-order now, but out fully on the 3rd of April.
Yeah,
And if you
that's right.
don't already follow Becky, head over to her Instagram profile. So much more. You also have a YouTube and
Mhm.
obviously the blog and all sorts of bits and pieces. You're everywhere. So hopefully people will gravitate over towards you and show your account some love.
Thank you very much.
All right.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
I think I'm going to have to book in another call with you and talk to you in another episode because I think, say, we could talk about soils and how you can look after your soil and how it in turn will look after your plants for a long time. So thanks very much for your time today.
Great, you're welcome.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Becky, take care now. Bye bye.
Bye.
To say that I enjoyed my conversation with Becky is a real understatement. And it was an absolute pleasure hearing many of the facts that I talk to you about, normally on a day-to-day basis on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and on Threads, being fed back to me in a much more scientific manner. Please do head over to Becky's profile, which is So Much More, on Instagram and YouTube, and give her a follow and her account some love. And of course, if you're interested, do find a stockist of her brand new book, Grow a New Garden, which is actually out now. Now, as we thunder into the middle part of April, for those of you that are following along real time on Instagram, YouTube and TikTok, it's time to start hardening off, pinching out and taking some cuttings from our recently woken up dahlia tubers. Now, they've been in the greenhouse for the last month or so and have come up really, really well, producing masses of really lovely, soft green growth. But we want to control the size of these plants until it's time to bed them out, and bedding out really won't be able to take place until we're clear of the final frosts. Pay attention to your local calendars and your horticultural growing zones when it comes to this. Here on the south coast of the UK, it normally hovers around the last week of May, somewhere around my birthday. The 20th of May is normally about the time I bed my dahlias out. However, they are starting to get really quite large and you want to make sure that they're not too cramped, so space them out in your greenhouse or in your growing spaces or grow tents, wherever you may be bringing them on, and consider pinching them out. Wherever possible, you want to stop the foliage of your plants touching each other and creating bridges. These small micro bridges can be the perfect point of contact that allows small slugs and snails to transport themselves between different plants, causing mass destruction. So wherever possible, keep them well spaced and give them plenty of room. It is also now time to pinch them out, and I normally allow a dahlia tuber to produce between 3 and 5 stems per tuber, pinching out the top shoots when they get to around 3 or 4 leaf buds from the floor. This keeps the plants bushy and obviously controls the size. There's a basic rule of thumb here. The more shoots that you get, the more flowers you will end up with in the future. So it's a great way of not only controlling the size and the space they take up, but also ensuring they become strong, bushy and solid. If you're growing in a greenhouse, make sure that you're opening your vents daily and consider opening the door on considerably warm days. One day last week, I forgot to open the door in the greenhouse before I went on to work, and when I came home, temperatures had reached in excess of 45 degrees, which is obviously incredibly warm. Now, your dahlias can take that kind of heat, but it's obviously going to push them on in their growth development very, very quickly. So make sure that you get your vents open and you're controlling the temperature in the greenhouse and keeping it somewhere in the early to mid 20s wherever possible. Obviously, if your temperatures are exceeding that kind of temperature regularly, you're going to have to pay very, very close attention to your watering. It is now the perfect time to start thinking about hardening these plants off and moving them on to their next stages. And for me, that involves hardening them off a little bit by, as I say, opening the greenhouse door and letting the air in and circulate, keeping the temperature a little lower, but also moving the potted plants outside to allow them to experience the wind and cooling temperatures around their leaves. This should be done wherever possible on a warm and relatively still day. Put them out for 1 or 2 hours just to get them acclimatised and used to being outside and having the wind between their leaves before placing them back into the greenhouse. You need to do this in and out clownfish dance for several days or even a week or so to make sure that they are used to being outside. It can come as quite a shock, especially if they've produced large amounts of growth, so take it slow and do it slow and steady wherever possible. The ultimate goal here is to get them used to being outside for the entire day before they move to the unheated cold frame where I can close the lid during the evenings and just keep the worst of the weather off of them. Please bear in mind that if you do this too quickly, your plants are likely to go limp and go into shock. And if this happens, you want to place them back into the greenhouse and look after them carefully while they recover. All you have to think about is equate it to yourself when you wake up in the morning. If you wake up and instantly throw the duvet off of yourself and jump out of bed, the shock of being outside from underneath the covers can be really quite disorientating. And the same is exactly to be said for a plant. It just needs a little bit of time to acclimatise, toughen itself up and be used to the idea that it's moving on to its next stages. Obviously, if you're moving them outside, make sure that you keep up with your applications of garlic water, as there is a high likelihood you're going to actually move a small slug or snail back into your grow space when you're moving these plants in or out. Also, inspect your cold frame really well before you place your dahlia tubers into the cold frame, as you can guarantee there's going to be a small slug and snail in there as well. Keep up with your garlic water, applying it every single time that you water, and over a period of days, weeks and months, slowly but surely your plant will absorb the flavour, taste and smell and be a natural repellent for slugs and snails, making it really quite unpleasant for them to eat. We've also experienced our first couple of rain showers for almost a month, which means the slugs and snails have woken up in the garden too. So please do make sure that you're reapplying your garlic water to tender plants all around the garden, especially things like hostas, unless you want them to look like a lace doily for the rest of the season. Again, make sure that you're watering this on using your watering can rows every couple of days. And over a period of days, weeks and months, your plant will once again absorb the taste, flavour and smell of the garlic and become its own natural repellent to slugs and snails. Next week on the Gardener Ben podcast, we're once again staying here in the UK, and I have the absolute pleasure in talking to Rob, who is the account behind Rob's Allotment and the author of the book Grow to Eat. So tune in next week to listen to that particular conversation and make sure that you're catching up with all episodes of the podcast streaming across Apple, Amazon, Spotify and now on YouTube. So I'll catch you next week. And I hope that you haven't noticed that I have an absolute stinking cold too much. So I'm off to actually hide underneath a duvet with a hot cup of lemon, honey and ginger and nurse myself back to full health. I'll see you all again soon. And until then, happy gardening.